And he has no redeeming characteristics anymore. And I think he's dangerous.
If you're in the Oval Office today, what would you say to him?
Resign.
Imagine the most powerful man on earth ruled not by wisdom, but by childhood scars, raging insecurities, and an obsession with revenge. Mary Trump, his own niece and a clinical psychologist, is pulling back the curtain on Donald Trump's darkest truths, and her revelations could mean America is closer to collapse than anyone dares to admit.
His daughter, Mary Trump, is a psychologist, and she wrote an expose book about her dear uncle. And it is called Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. And this book, my mind, I mean, anytime you watch any of the interviews, whether it be on CNBC, whether it be on, on the New York Times, there's this amazing article in Washington Post.
Just call him what he is. He's a loser. He loses constantly. He has never legitimately won anything in his life. He's a thin-skinned baby who has nothing to offer but white grievance. If I were one of these candidates, I would simply show up to a debate with a bowl of mashed potatoes, because that was his very first experience of humiliation was when he was being a total brat before my grandmother put dinner on the table. And my dad, just in order to shut him up and stop him from tormenting his little brother, Robert, took a bowl of mashed potatoes and dumped it on Donald's head. So he hates that story. He has never been able to laugh at himself in a healthy way. So it really is not easy. It's really not difficult to get under that extraordinarily thin skin of his.
Mary Trump was never just a family member observing from the sidelines. She was a trained psychologist who had spent decades studying trauma, dysfunction, and power. But when she finally broke her silence, she was not gossiping. She was dissecting the architecture of a man she calls a threat to democracy itself. In her piercing analysis, Donald Trump is not some clever political tactician. He is a man whose emotional growth froze in childhood, leaving him impulsive, insecure, and desperate for approval. This is not speculation. Mary has lived inside the Trump dynasty, a fortress of cold ambition and calculated cruelty. At the Hay Festival in Wales, her voice carried a chilling authority as she warned, silence is no longer an option. She described her uncle as a master manipulator, weaponizing charm while showing zero empathy. The question she raised to a stunned audience lingers dangerously. If this man is incapable of emotional maturity, what happens when he holds unchecked power in the White House again?
If we are unfortunate enough to put him in the White House again in 2024, it would be an unthinkable tragedy. This man has one policy position, and it's to keep himself out of prison. We saw tonight that he does nothing but lie. Do not let the fact that he lies loudly and with impunity blind you to the fact that he is a traitor to this country. We have seen him betray this country, and we know that the people who know him best cannot support him because of that. I've known Donald Trump all of my life. He's the same man now as he was when I was a child. He's incapable of changing. And if we let him anywhere near the levers of power again, that would be one of the worst mistakes this country could ever make. And I believe at that point, the American experiment would be over. We must re-elect President Joe Biden. Thank you.
So understand how Donald Trump became the man who now threatens the very core of American democracy. Mary urges us to look back not years, but generations. The Trump household was never a place of love or nurturing. It was a brutal training ground for predators. Fred Trump, Donald's father, ran the family like a cold corporate empire, where emotions were liabilities and kindness was punished. Mary recalls her father, Fred Jr., a man of warmth and dreams, who was crushed under Fred Sr.'s relentless abuse until he succumbed to addiction and an early death. Donald, witnessing this, vowed never to appear weak. He absorbed his father's ruthlessness like a sponge, learning to weaponize charm and view empathy as a flaw. Every trait we see today, the bluster, the dominance, the inability to accept fault, was forged in those merciless years. Mary's chilling claim, her uncle is not just dangerous because of politics. He is dangerous because he never emotionally left his childhood.
Nobody can do it like me. Nobody. Nobody can do it like me. Honestly.
Nobody's stronger than me.
Nobody has better toys than I do.
There's nobody bigger or better at the military than I am.
Nobody loves the Bible more than I do.
Nobody builds walls better than me.
Nobody's better to people with disabilities than me.
Nobody's fighting for the veterans like I'm fighting for the veterans.
There's nobody that's done so much for equality as I have.
There's nobody more pro-Israel than I am. There's nobody more conservative than me.
There is nobody that respects women more than I do.
Nobody would be tougher on ISIS than Donald Trump.
There's nobody's ever had crowds like Trump has had.
There's nobody that understands the horror of nuclear better than me. And nobody even understands it but me. It's called devaluation. The sale of the uranium that nobody knows what it means. I know what it means.
Nobody knows more about trade than me.
Nobody knows the game better than I do.
Nobody's in the history of this country has ever known so much about infrastructure as Donald Trump.
I know the H-1B. I know the H-2B. Nobody knows it better than me.
Nobody knows politicians better than I do.
Nobody knows more about taxes than I do. Nobody knows more about debt than I do.
Nobody knows the system better than me.
Mary's revelations dig even deeper into Donald Trump's psychological makeup, painting a portrait of a man emotionally frozen in time. She describes how his father's cruelty taught Donald that power was everything, and vulnerability was fatal. Even as a child, he displayed calculated aggression, once turning a simple game of catch into an exercise of dominance. This behavior was not corrected, it was rewarded. Fred Sr. treated his son's hostility as strength, reinforcing a belief that charm was a weapon and compassion a weakness. This conditioning explains Donald's obsession with appearances and his constant need for validation from powerful men. Mary recounts how during a family inheritance dispute, Donald cut off medical coverage for her nephew, a child with cerebral palsy, using a sick child's health as a bargaining chip. These shocking actions reveal not just a man desperate to win, but someone fundamentally incapable of empathy. Mary warns us, this is not a personality quirk, it is a clinical pathology that puts the entire nation.
So if you look at, there's narcissistic personality disorder, there's antisocial personality disorder, etc. If Donald were a patient of a clinical psychologist, and if he were willing to go through a battery of tests in order to be diagnosed, chances are, I'm speculating, but it's informed speculation, that he would come back with a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. There's probably a lot of comorbidity there. He's a very troubled man.
Foundation of Mary Trump's assessment lies in her professional expertise as a clinical psychologist. She is not just sharing family gossip. She is delivering a forensic analysis of a man she argues satisfies all 9 diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, as outlined in the DSM, but it does not end there. Mary suggests Donald Trump also exhibits traits of antisocial personality disorder, commonly known as sociopathy, and possibly a long undiagnosed learning disability that impairs his ability to process information effectively. She describes a man with arrested emotional development, reactive, compulsive, and unable to learn from mistakes. In her stark evaluation, Trump is emotionally the same as he was at 3 years old, incapable of growth or change. This, Mary warns, is not just troubling on a personal level. It is catastrophic when such a man wields the power of the presidency. The audience is left to grapple with a chilling question. What happens when a child's insecurities are armed with nuclear codes?
One of the things he's most afraid of is being found out. To be, to have people understand that everything about him that's projected publicly is based on a myth, that he's literally nothing of who he claims to be. He's nothing other people have purported him to be, starting with my grandfather, who's the man responsible for having created this myth. Then we understand that that's where we attack him. If we understand that he has to, like, in order to protect his psyche, in order to protect his extraordinarily fragile ego, has to project this idea that he's the greatest, the best. He's always speaking in hyperboles. He's trying to convince himself as much as he's trying to convince you, me, or everybody else, right? Then we understand that he doesn't really believe it either. So we attack those points as well. I continue to think that the best weapon against Donald Trump is mockery and just revealing all of those weaknesses, because otherwise he's going to continue to get away, as he has now for decades, with everything he's done with impunity. And shockingly, he's much more powerful and protected now than he ever was.
Mary's warnings took on explosive form when she released her memoir Too Much and Never Enough, which sold nearly 1 million copies on its first day. The Trump family reacted with predictable fury, launching legal attacks in an attempt to silence her, but the damage was done. Mary was also revealed as the anonymous source who handed over the Trump family's tax records to the New York Times, fueling a Pulitzer Prize-winning expose on decades of financial fraud and tax evasion. The investigation uncovered schemes that allowed the Trumps to avoid hundreds of millions in taxes, exposing Donald's self-made billionaire image as a carefully constructed lie. Mary's decision to break her silence was not driven by money or revenge, she insists, but by a moral obligation to warn the public, with courts eventually allowing her book to stand. She had successfully detonated the wall of secrecy around the Trump dynasty, yet her revelations also sparked a broader question. Can a family built on deception ever produce a leader capable of truth?
I want people to know that you include some of your past speeches in this book and an appendix in the end, including your 2016 convention speech in Cleveland accepting the vice presidential nomination. I was in Cleveland at the time, watched that speech. It's a good speech. I appreciated reading it again.
Thank you.
In that speech, you say Donald Trump is a good man. Not just that he was the man for the moment or the right man or a strong candidate, but a good man. Do you still believe he's a good man?
President Trump was wrong on January 6th in arguing that I had the authority to overturn the election. But I'll always be proud of the record that we created for the American people, Steve.
While you're proud of the record, you didn't just call him a good man again.
Well, look, I truly do believe that only God knows our hearts. And I'll leave it to others to make their own judgments.
Trump family's retaliation against Mary was vicious and relentless. Donald branded her a disgrace, and his brother Robert filed lawsuits to block her book, citing an old non-disclosure agreement. But as the legal battles raged, Mary dropped yet another bombshell: secret recordings of her aunt, Marianne Trump, Barry, calling Donald a liar with no principles and mocking his cruelty. These candid admissions from within the family's inner circle shattered the facade of loyalty and painted an unflattering portrait of a man whose own sister questioned his morality. Yet for Mary, this was never about scoring political points or family revenge. It was about alerting the nation to what she calls a clear and present danger. In media appearances and her subsequent podcast, she dissected not only her uncle's psyche, but also the machinery of authoritarianism that she believes he embodies. Her central thesis is chillingly simple: Donald Trump is not just a troubled man, he is the product of a toxic family system weaponized on a national scale.
Oddly, even though in some ways his psychology is enormously complex, what goes on in his head is actually quite simple. Okay. He is, underneath all of it, a very terrified little boy. He's that same little boy who was abandoned by his mom over almost 70 years ago. And when Donald talks about how great he is, how everything he touches is the best thing, we need to remember that grandiosity is in service to one person: my grandfather. It's as if Donald is still trying to convince his dad not to kill him off in the same way he killed off my dad.
2025. With Donald Trump back in the Oval Office, Mary's warnings took on an even more urgent tone. She argues that a second Trump term would not be about governance but revenge. She predicts that federal agencies would be purged of non-loyalists and replaced with figures whose allegiance is to Trump, not the Constitution. This, she warns, is the blueprint for an authoritarian regime. Mary criticizes the Democratic Party for underestimating Trump's appeal and failing to counter his narrative effectively. She laments their inability to engage disenfranchised voters, leaving a vacuum that Trump exploited. Still, she clings to a fragile hope that Democratic governors and grassroots movements could form a coalition strong enough to resist the slide into fascism. Her message to America is uncompromising: the old rules no longer apply, and survival demands a new kind of resistance. As she puts it, "You are not fighting a politician, you are fighting a pathology."
All he wants to do is appeal to his base. He has no principles. None. And his base, I mean, my God, if you were a religious person, you want to help people. Change of stories, a lack of preparation, the lying, the holy shit.
The only way Donald has changed, because he was always a bully, you know, even when we were in the backyard playing baseball, like I was 6 and he was 28 or however, I don't remember how much older he is than I am, but, you know, in his late 20s and I'm a little 6-year-old kid, he would still throw the ball as hard as he could at me. You know, he did it once. I thought I broke every single bone in my hand, you know, because he has to win.
Marie Trump's life has also transformed in the wake of her revelations, no longer just the Trump family's troubled niece. She has embraced her role as an outspoken critic and cultural commentator. Her podcast, The Mary Trump Show, has become a refuge for those seeking sanity in what she calls an upside-down world. She combines political analysis with psychological insight, offering a perspective few others can match. Her Substack newsletter swings between biting political commentary and deeply personal reflections on trauma and recovery. Surprisingly, Mary has also ventured into fiction, co-authoring a novel that blends feminist revenge fantasy with courtroom drama. For her, this creative pivot is not an escape but a reclamation of power. After decades of dissecting others, she is now rewriting her own narrative. Yet her central warning remains unchanged. Donald Trump's rise is not just about one man. It is about a system that rewards brutality over empathy, and if left unchecked, it could destroy American democracy itself.
I've known Donald Trump all of my life. He's the same man now as he was when I was a child. He's incapable of changing. And if we let him anywhere near the levers of power again, that would be one of the worst mistakes this country could ever make. And I believe at that point, the American experiment would be over.
As America grapples with the fallout of the 2024 election and Trump's return to power, Mary Trump's words echo with haunting clarity. She called him the most dangerous man in the world, a diagnosis that seemed hyperbolic at first, but now feels prophetic. Her clinical analysis has provided a framework for understanding Trump's behavior not as isolated incidents, but as symptoms of a deeper pathology. The question that lingers is whether her warnings have come too late. Did her revelations change enough minds to alter the course of history? Or are they merely the tragic record of a democracy in decline, as Mary herself shifts from witness to creator? She leaves behind a powerful legacy of truth-telling. She forced a nation to confront uncomfortable truths about power, personality, and the price of silence. But with Donald Trump's grip on American politics tighter than ever, the stakes have never been higher. The final, chilling question remains: if this is what a child raised in a house of cruelty can do to a family, what might he do to a country?